Welcome everybody to episode 1 of Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda Month. Now this show is one of my top 2 of all time. I absolutely love it. But I'll be the first to admit that it's far from perfect. In fact, some elements of the show are pretty darn bad. It is a show riddled with unfulfilled potential. But despite all its problems, it really is a fun sci-fi adventure that truly has moments of brilliance scattered throughout its 5 seasons. And it's one of my favorites for reasons beyond just the quality of the show itself. It is a show that, unlike any other, I feel a personal connection to. It just happened to be what the show was, the type of show that it was, and the time it came out. As a little kid, my 2 favorite things ever, and to this day, my favorite things really, were Star Trek, particularly Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and Xena and Hercules. I wanted to be Hercules. When I was a kid, before I knew anything about the actor himself, Kevin Sorbo was my idol. I wanted to be Hercules, and in a strange way, I wanted to be Hercules in the world of Star Trek because I just loved both of those things. And that really was my childhood. It really revolved around those 2 things. And then Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda came out, and it was Kevin Sorbo, the man who played Hercules, in a sci-fi show that was created from the writings of Gene Roddenberry, so it really was the real-life fusion of my childhood dream of Hercules and Star Trek. And that ended up not being the best thing, as Kevin Sorbo himself kind of perceived that to be what the show should be, and he kind of pulled it in a direction that was negative. But as a kid, that was kind of a dream come true, and I was very excited for this show. And the beginning season really presented so much potential. It had the potential to be the next Star Trek. That first season did have a lot of flaws and a lot of stumbling blocks to get over, but most shows do in their first season. Even something like Star Trek Next Generation, first season honestly isn't that great. So it really was setting itself up to be something stupendous. It didn't quite get there, but I still fell in love with it and stuck through it the whole way. And part of it was a dream cast of characters. First, you had Kevin Sorbo, obviously, as the lead, which at the time was just a dream come true for me. And you had the character of Tyr Anasazi, played by Keith Hamilton Cobb, who's one of my favorite actors of all time to this day, who played that character, until they ruined him later on, perfectly. He's actually one of my favorite characters of all time. Movies, television, books, whatever. That character of Tyr Anasazi for the first couple seasons is one of my favorites. I fell in love with that character, and he represented so much that I wanted to personally be and create out of myself, the whole Nietzschean race. I was in love with the philosophies of the show that were represented within those characters, and the different character types that were represented by characters like Harper, and just, I don't know, the whole thing, the whole cast just kind of came together in everything that I wanted at that time in my life. And to top it all off, one of the most endearing characters was Trans Gemini, played by my celebrity crush, Laura Bertram, who I had a crush on since she was on the show Ready or Not in Canada. And I had no idea until watching the first episode she was even in it. So you were putting my childhood idol with my celebrity crush in a show that was the perfect marriage of everything I ever wanted to see. It just came together to be, I didn't even care when there was a bad episode or, different things happened with like writing and different producers taking over later on, as I'll explain when I talk about the seasons. I didn't even care in the beginning because it was just so wonderful to me personally, is what I wanted. And I was so excited. Then it comes to the time. You had all those personal reasons why the show really spoke to me. And it also came about at a time when my parents were getting divorced. That was pretty much it. The airing of that show was the end of high school into a time when there was a lot of personal stuff going on within my family. My parents getting divorced, me not being certain of my future and what I wanted, feeling pushed in a certain direction that I didn't want to take, and myself, having people make decisions for me, and on top of that, me making life decisions that ended up being the wrong thing for me as a whole, but not really understanding that at the time. It was just a very difficult time, and it was a time when my family kind of split, didn't spend a lot of time together because of everything that was going on personally, And there was one thing, though, that we all came together and watched at the time. It was Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. And that really meant something to me because that's something I have a memory of. My family used to come together in the living room to watch some specific shows. There were always shows that maybe my mom and I would watch, or my dad would watch, or different people. There was always just one or two shows that my whole family would enjoy. And those would be things like Xena and Hercules and Star Trek and MASH. There were just a couple of those shows, and as that time was ending and everyone was kind of splitting apart, and I was setting out to, define my future and not sure how to do that, there was that one moment, that 1 hour a week, and then when I got the DVD sets especially, where we would actually, things would feel comfortable, things would feel like it's going to be okay. It had a feeling of comfort and safety during that time. And for a little while too, my aunt and my cousin lived with us, and that was towards the show's end, and I started getting the DVD sets, and that was something we watched together. My Aunt Michelle and my cousin Ryan, and we'd all be together, and we'd watch that show. So it was something that, to me, Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda represents comfort, and just represents a simpler time, and represents a time where you don't have to make decisions that are life-defining, and you can just be who you are and not have worries. It's a show that even when I put on today, it's like a comfort blanket. And that's why I didn't care like when things went bad down the road. I just loved the show for what it was, and I love the actors, and I love, even when things went bad, they genuinely cared about their roles, and you could see it, and there were still, even in the worst of times, some genuinely brilliant moments that really still surprised me and brought hope to me for perhaps it'll turn itself around before it ends. It was everything that I loved wrapped around, and it came in the perfect time in my life. And if it had come at a different time, I might not have the exact same admiration that I have. It just happened to be perfect timing. And again, with the timing, for me, it felt like also the capstone to the end of an era. Shows like Xena and Hercules were over. Things like, the spin-off things like Jack of all trades, Cleopatra 25 were ending. Those were done. The era of, Star Trek TV, when you have two shows running at the same time, Next Generation, and then Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, then you have Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and that wonderful era of Star Trek was coming to a close as this show was airing. And it felt like an entire era was ending. That era, that boom of really good 90s sci-fi TV was coming to a close. And it was the era where it was Gen 6 for video games, the Dreamcast, and the PS2, and the GameCube, and the original Xbox, and my favorite era for gaming. And by the time this show ended, that was already kind of coming to a close. It was to the point where it wasn't over yet, but I was seeing the end. I was seeing the end of where I would be very invested in video games. I knew that the future wasn't going to hold the same draw for me. And it was just an era of everything like that. Everything revolved around that. My childhood was over. It just, to me, it was this comfortable thing where it was the end of a huge chapter of my life. Divide your life into multiple stages. This show represented the end of stage 1 and the beginning of the more difficult stage 2, where you really decide who you are. And again, that's why this show means so much to me. And that's why I'm happy to be able to share this with you guys. I'm looking forward to doing these videos. And I know ones like this are a little long-winded, I understand that. But thank you for watching and understanding that this really means something to me, and I really hope you can see that through my talking about the different seasons. I'm going to go through each season and really talk about it, and definitely there will be spoilers, I'll say that. If you really want to watch the series without any spoilers whatsoever, wait until watch these videos after you see it. But I'm going to go through each season and talk about them, and then I'll show off my collection at the very end and go over my top 10 episodes and really get an in-depth look at what this show is and what it really means to me and what it could have been versus what it was, and what happened to create that gap between the potential that seasons 1 and 2 held into what happened in seasons 3, 4, and 5, and starting in the middle of season 2. And to me, it's a very interesting case. It's a very interesting series, and it held so much more for me during that time. This was the first, my family didn't get the internet until I was in high school. We didn't have the internet until 2000, maybe 3 or 4. Like it was a while into it, and this was the first time I was ever actively involved with a fan community online. So it's also really, it's that for me too. It's a first in that. It's also the first time where I really collected stuff from a show. I actually have, I'll show you my collection, a series of props from the show. This is the only show ever where I actually have props that were used in the show, and that means so much to me. It's something where it was so many firsts, and it's also was a last. It was the end of a portion of my life, and Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda means so much to me on a personal level, and I really hope you enjoyed this series of videos. I will see you in the next video when I talk about Season 1.